I'm a huge nature lover. Being in the woods is where I find my bliss. Because I work in an office all week long, I find it challenging to get my nature fix. And in the fall, when the days are shorter, it's even harder to find a time to get out on the trails. So it often means walking at dusk. Sometimes I even end up in the woods after dark. On one such night, I ended up in the dark and in danger. But my trip into the woods started off really good. The fall leaves were fully on display and the weather hadn't turned too cold yet. Plus, I had the trail mostly to myself. Because of that, I just kept walking and sort of lost myself. Not that I was physically lost, but more lost in my thoughts as I made my way deeper into the woods. It was only when I noticed that it was getting dark that I heard something. It was off into the woods. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. I stopped to listen, and that's when I could hear a voice.
Is anybody out there? Anybody?
It sounded like someone was in trouble. So I almost turned around and went back the way I came. But then I thought, if somebody was truly in trouble, I had to help. So I pushed forward and continued down the trail. The further I went, the clearer the voice became. It was totally apparent that someone was yelling for help.
Anybody? Help me! You want it all!
That's when I stopped and realized that I was alone. I didn't have any weapons, so how could I help anyone? But by then, I'd gone so far, I wasn't sure where I was anymore and how to find my way back out of the woods. That's when I heard another desperate cry for help.
It's after me! It's coming!
I moved along carefully, not sure what was happening. I was getting more than a little scared by then, and that's when I heard the cries for help suddenly stop.
Help me!
It was like they'd been cut off, or something had stopped them. I'd gotten turned around by then, and it was getting dark, so I wasn't sure which way to go. I crept along, and once I made a few more steps, I saw something glowing off the trail. I decided to check it out and saw that it was a cell phone lying in among the leaves. As much as I wanted to leave was as much as I was curious, though. I went and picked up the phone and saw that it was still on. I also saw that it was open to a video, so I played it. What I saw scared me to death. It was a video of someone running through the woods, and it was clear that there was someone or something after them. I was glued to the screen, barely able to move as I watched the video 2 more times. And that's when I heard something off in the woods. It was hard to distinguish what it was, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. As I ran out of the woods, I called the police, and they said they would send a car. Desperate, I asked when it would get there, and they said it would be at least 5 minutes. Let me tell you, that was the longest 5 minutes of my life as I stumbled through the darkness. I finally saw the lights of the police car on the far edge of the woods. I made a beeline right for it as fast as I could. I explained what I saw and heard and showed them the video. They called for several other units and they searched the woods but never found anyone. But they also let the phone get locked, and when they tried to open it, they accidentally erased all the data. So whatever happened that night became a total mystery, and I can tell you that the memory of that video on that phone still haunts me at night.
Oh my God, it's after me!
I like to say I'm self-reliant. Others might say I'm a loner. There's much to be said about self-reliance, but sometimes it can get you into real trouble. One thing I like to do is to take long hikes in the woods, and sometimes I even solo camp for a couple days. Being alone in nature is something that recharges my batteries and connects me with creation. One time I got a little overconfident on a long day hike, and I think the reason for that, it was only a day hike. I had done hundreds of them before, I never had any problem, but as they say, there's a first time for everything. It was in the fall and I was in the mountains of West Virginia walking along the Appalachian Trail. I was taking in the beauty of the trees and the local flora when I decided to go off trail to take a cut across path that turned out not to be really a path, but I forged ahead anyway, pushing through bushes and brush. After all my trips, I was pretty confident in finding my way, but this time I must have gotten turned around. When I finally gave up and turned around, I couldn't find the path, which pretty much meant I was lost, and my cell phone had no signal, so it wasn't going to save the day. I'd brought along enough supplies to survive a single night outdoors, but I certainly wasn't looking forward to spending a very cold night in the woods, so I kept forging ahead in a direction that I thought was taking me back towards civilization. But as the sun began to fall, I got nervous, and soon after that, I began to have this feeling that I wasn't alone in the woods. I didn't see or hear anything. It was just my intuition. Of course, that didn't ease my growing anxiety, but there was nothing to do about it but keep going. I knew there were all sorts of creatures out there among the trees. Most of them were harmless to people, but there were a growing number of reports of bobcats and mountain lions, along with bears in the area. I'd also heard a lot of local lore, which included the Mothman and a creature called Red Eyes. I'd seen the Mothman movie, so I didn't give either one of those ideas a lot of credence, but I experienced something in the woods that may have changed my attitude. I'd read once that if you're lost in the woods, you should find a water source and follow it, so I walked down into a valley until I found a creek. As I moved along the creekside, I heard not only the water, but something else. It was a cross between a low rumble and a fluttering sound. Ahead of me, I saw a cluster of debris that must have gotten caught up in the creek waters when they were running high. There were multiple trees, bushes, and other plants, and even a car tire among the cluster. The car tire gave me some hope because it could mean that there was some civilization nearby. Of course, that tire could have been carried for miles in the rushing water when the creek ran high. It was as I got closer that I saw something nestled down among the debris, and it caused me to stop in my tracks. Red eyes stared at me from the darkness, and it was accompanied by what I can only call was a low growl. Of course, that only increased my fear. I reversed direction and moved away from the cluster of debris, and that's when I heard the sound of fluttering wings. When I looked up, I saw a dark figure fly overhead, and it disappeared into the darkness of the sky. I felt like it was tracking me. Running by then, I moved away from the area as fast as I could, pretty much in a full panic. I watched the sky, but I didn't see anything, but I thought I heard it. The fluttering of a large set of wings. It was only when I saw the lights of some houses in the distance that I finally calmed down. But all the time I was on the run, I waited for something to swoop down out of the sky to carry me away. When I was a kid, my parents split up, and after a couple of years, my mom remarried. My stepdad's house was out in the country, which was a real change of pace for my brother and I. It took some time getting used to after living our entire lives in the city. One thing I can tell you is that living out in the country can get boring after living in a town. Of course, being young boys, that leads to boredom, which leads to mischief. But with the downsides came upsides. While it took us a while to get used to it, I finally learned to enjoy the outdoors, and that led to exploring the woods and the forests around our house. They were very lush and full of adventure for us. On one occasion, we went a little overboard though. We left our house early in the morning and hiked deep into the woods. We'd been out all day, and the night was coming on with a misty fog rolling in. That was when we came upon a cabin in the woods. From the immediate observation, it looked like it was abandoned, But to be safe, we held back and watched the place, checking it out from different angles to make sure it truly was empty. After about a half an hour, we decided it was finally safe to check it out, and we quickly discovered that it was abandoned. There was a broken down tractor in a dilapidated shed next to the house. It was quite interesting, but nothing compared to what we saw inside. It was as if whoever lived there had just gotten up and left without taking anything. There were tons of curiosities inside, including dust-covered furniture, old radios, and even an old electric piano. The place was permeated with a dry, stale odor of emptiness. But we quickly discovered that it was far from empty. The place wasn't that big, but as we headed toward one of the back rooms, I heard this whispering.
What are you doing here?
And it got progressively louder as my brother got closer to the door. I was beginning to think I was the only one hearing it. Then my brother stopped dead in his tracks. He looked back at me and I pivoted my body toward the front door. And without a word, I pointed toward the door. He immediately got the message, and almost before I took my first step, he was in motion. I was at sprinting speed in less than 2 steps, and he was right behind me. We banged out of that front door, and we were off into the woods in less than 10 seconds. When we finally stopped running and turned around, I didn't hear or see anyone. But that was enough for me. I wasn't going back in that house, not for anything. A month later, we tried to find the cabin again, but we couldn't find it anywhere in the woods. It was as if it had never been there at all.